Hello, and thank you for joining us. Whether you're watching online or on television, I'm Farah Nasser, and we are waiting to hear the latest update on the COVID-19 situation from the Prime Minister this Friday. He's expected to speak outside Rideau Cottage in about 15 minutes. We're going to begin, though, with some disturbing new information about that deadly rampage in Nova Scotia that left 22 people dead. Just moments ago, the RCMP provided a detailed timeline of the deadly weekend. The gunman's destruction spanned 23 kilometers, 7 locations, and it lasted more than 12 hours. Here's what we know now. Investigators confirm the violent spree began Saturday night when the gunman got into a fight with his girlfriend at a party. She was tied up, but she managed to escape and then spent the night hiding in the woods. He then returned to the party. He killed 7 more people in Portapique alone. Gabriel Wortman shot 13 people. Several were known to him. Many were innocent bystanders who just happened to be in his deadly path. Or in some cases, the victims lost their lives trying to save others. Here's Superintendent Darren Campbell describing just a small portion of this horrific night.
The gunman continued southbound on Highway 4 from Glenholm to the Wentworth area. Along the way, he encountered a woman who was out walking, and he shot the woman at the roadside. He continued south towards DeBert. At that point, he encountered 2 other individuals who happened to be driving their vehicles at that time. A witness described that the suspect had pulled over one of the vehicles and had shot one of the drivers. He continued driving down that same road, Highway 4, and he encountered a second vehicle, and he shot and killed that victim at that location.
These details are so difficult to listen to. We've also learned that the gunman owned not one, but several look-alike police cruisers and was armed with a pistol and long-barrel weapons on his rampage. We also now know his killing spree ended with a chance encounter with police who were stopping for gas at around noon on Sunday. A virtual vigil is being held tonight to honor the victims. Organizers say it's going to showcase politicians, musicians, and spiritual leaders. Global News will be airing the vigil on its maritime stations at 7 o'clock Atlantic time. We're also going to be streaming the 2-hour ceremony on YouTube, on Facebook, and on globalnews.ca. Once again, we're expecting the Prime Minister, who will have more to say about tonight's vigil around 11:15 Eastern Time, 8:15 Pacific. Now, while we wait to hear from Justin Trudeau, let's take a look at the latest number of infections when it comes to COVID-19 worldwide. That's where we'll start. There are now 2.7 million confirmed cases of the coronavirus. And a staggering number, almost 200,000 people have lost their lives due to COVID-19 complications. More than 2,200 of those deaths right here in Canada, and over 42,000 people have tested positive. Taking a look at the numbers province by province. Here we are now, your map. There are now 3,700 cases in Alberta, more than 3,700. Saskatchewan, where the Premier has announced a phased plan to reopen the province, has 331 known cases. And Ontario has 13,000 cases, with 640 cases reported just moments ago. And take a close look at Quebec. It now has close to 22,000 confirmed cases. We're joined this morning by Jackson Prosco, who is in Washington, Eric Sorensen in Toronto, and Mike Lecouture, who is in Ottawa. Mike, I want to start with you. What are we expecting the Prime Minister to focus on today?
Today, we're expecting some more help for small businesses, specifically in the field of rent. We've heard from a lot of businesses who are saying, look, I'm not making any money right now, yet I still have to pay all of my rent. They're not getting any relief on that. So we're expecting the Prime Minister to say that there will be some relief there. He's working with the provinces and the territories because they are the ones that manage that type of thing. Don't forget, the country basically closed down around mid-March. So all businesses that were deemed non-essential were forced to close, many of them struggling since that time. So as a result, many of them are now coming up on their second month payment for rent. The first one was April 1st, now May the 1st, and many of them are struggling to try and find the money for that because either they just had enough to get them through April 1st or May 1st now coming up. Some of them not even getting through, some of them having to close according to the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses. So we're hearing that the Prime Minister will be announcing some sort of a relief on that. And Businesses are saying, though, unfortunately, it may be too late for them at this point. The government has tried to roll out big planks at first, get them out the door, and then fill in the gaps, as the Prime Minister continues to mention. This might be one of those gaps that they're getting to a little too late. If a business has not been able to make it to this point, they may not be able to make it further. However, it looks like this is where the Prime Minister is going to be going today, Farah.
And these are people's livelihoods. We know that small business is such an important pillar of the economy as well, and the struggle is right across the country with that. What's different across the country is numbers when it comes to cases with COVID-19 and what province could open earlier than another. We're hearing about Saskatchewan's plans. But, Mike, there's also been calls from the opposition to say, this might be a federal government jurisdiction. Maybe the federal government has to decide because, of course, this virus doesn't understand borders.
Yeah, and that's one of the difficulties that the Prime Minister and this federal government has faced, is that they're really trying to leave it to all the different provinces and territories to handle this. And we just saw the numbers in that map. You can see how different it is. And the Prime Minister said yesterday different provinces are at different postures. In other words, that they are different arcs of this pandemic, and whether or not they feel is the right time to open. The Prime Minister really wants to leave it up to each Premier to do that. It was the same type of communication that they've had. They continue to have that weekly conference call, the same communication around the Emergencies Act, whether or not it needed to be invoked. Some provinces wanted it, others didn't, feeling that they had what they needed to deal with all of this. And as you're seeing in Atlantic Canada, some of the numbers really kind of stagnating or at least not growing. And, Scott Moe yesterday unveiling this 4-phase plan. And the first phase looks like it'll include, things like dentists, chiropractors, and optometrists, and even letting people go fishing, having boat launches on May the 4th. And by mid-May, letting people open up golf courses, because, of course, that's a demand as well. And then slowly, as they go, May 19th, we're looking more on the retail side. You have hair salons, barbershops, and some retail stores. And then the other phases that he unveiled were without specific dates attached to them, and those would be things like gyms, bars, restaurants, and seeing where we would go there. And one of the considerations that they have to make, every province and every territory, is whether or not they're at a position where they can continue to test and track to make sure that they aren't triggering another spike. And that is the concern. The Prime Minister has mentioned that many times, that they want to make sure that if they are going to reopen, if every province or every territory feels that they have the ability to reopen and restart their economy, that they won't reignite the virus and have more transmission in the community and have a second wave, because a lot of experts have said it's not worth reopening the economy if the coronavirus sort of respreads across your province or not. The other thing that was interesting is that, Premier Moe has said, well, we may be opening sooner rather than later. That doesn't mean people from other provinces are welcome to come in and take advantage of the fact that we might be open from neighboring provinces. So that is also a consideration. I mean, it's more acute, I think, or more difficult in certain border towns, and some would say here in Ottawa, when you consider just over my shoulder is Gatineau, and there are police checkpoints at the bridges going between Ottawa and Gatineau, and so there has to be that sort of coordination and consideration between provinces. But to your first question about whether or not there can be a federal coordination, the Prime Minister is really trying as much as possible to leave it up to the provinces and doesn't want to get involved in that, knowing that different provinces are at different stages of this.
Mike, thank you for that. And I want to pick up on the testing part, but just take a look right now. This is the door at Rideau Cottage. You see those ribbons tied around the trees there. And that, of course, as we today remember and have a vigil for the victims of that horrific massacre in Nova Scotia over the weekend. Mike, stay there, and I want to actually bring in Eric Sorensen, because you mentioned testing and you mentioned how different the provinces are, and our audience saw that in the map. Eric Sorensen has been crunching his own numbers and taking a look at the numbers. Give us a bit of a picture, Eric, about where provinces stand right now, because things fluctuate, but we do know one that has stood out this entire time, and that's Quebec.
Well, that's right. And not so much on testing, but in terms of the cases. And there really are three categories of provinces right now, and 5 or 6 are doing not too badly. 3 are clearly in the center of the struggle, and one of them, Quebec, is having a hard time. We looked at sort of where the provinces are per capita over the last 10 days. And if you look at Saskatchewan, they have just over 2 cases per 100,000. So you can see why they might say to themselves, it's 2 cases per 100,000. Can't we start to open things up a little bit? It's not doing so differently from Manitoba, which is around that type of number. New Brunswick is doing about like that. Prince Edward Island. As well, Newfoundland. Newfoundland had a spike of cases around funerals that happened early on, and so their numbers always looked a bit skewed. But over the last 10 days, Newfoundland's numbers have really kind of reduced as well. So those provinces are all doing very well. In some instances, they are big provinces with small populations. Certainly density seems to be an issue with this. If you look at New York City, or you consider that many of the outbreaks have happened in places like around Montreal, Laval, or Toronto, or the Vancouver area, that density makes a difference. One other province is doing well, and that would be British Columbia. We looked at that same data, and British Columbia right now has seen 7 cases per 100,000 over the last 10 days. They're also getting it under control. The 3 provinces that are still sort of struggling, Nova Scotia has seen an uptick in their numbers. They have 33 per 100,000, but they've also increased their testing. And that's always one of the keys here is, are you doing enough testing? Because if you do more testing, you'll get more results. And so in some instances, like Germany was the best example of this, Germany's numbers went up pretty high in cases, but that was because they were doing massive testing. So Nova Scotia is seeing their numbers up a little bit. Ontario in the same kind of range, about 35 cases per 100,000. And Alberta has seen an uptick recently. They're about 39 per 100,000.
I just want to...
So they're in the middle of this. Those other provinces, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to bring our viewers' attention while you were talking about the testing that we were showing this thing called the Spartan Cube, which is one of the companies that the government's invested in. And that's this little test. It's the size of a coffee cup. Do you, Eric, think that this is going to be something that we look at when economies open? I mean, testing people before they go into work. Is there any indication of that happening?
Well, it's going to be a matter of can you distribute enough tests, and are there enough types of tests that are reliable? Certainly, testing and contact tracing are 2 of the key kind of fit together in a glove to get the country to a place where we have the information we need to understand whether we should go forward. Right now, the moving forward is a bit of a risk because they have lower numbers in Saskatchewan, and they're doing a lot of testing in Saskatchewan. But will that last? Can you know that you've reached everybody that has the disease? Have they been tested? Do you know that your numbers are actually accurate? And without testing, without contact tracing, that becomes very difficult. So I think that as they kind of move forward, because obviously governments are investing a lot of money right now into finding places to get more kits, to try something out like this Spartan device. You can't print off 1 million of them all at once. But the more you get in that, the further they're going to be along the road to being able to test and be able to say it's safe enough to maybe allow people to do more things, as Saskatchewan is already planning to do.
Eric, and I'm going to bring in Mike LeCouture again. One of the things that I noticed about Saskatchewan's plan from the offset is childcare and schools. Being a mom of 2 young kids, I know, Mike, you have kids too, little kids too. Mm-hmm. I would think that childcare should be one of the biggest priorities, given the fact that parents need to go to work, and that's how to restart the economy.
And that is one of the difficulties. I mean, when you consider that people need to get back to work, where will their kids go? Another consideration, though, and I think this is one of those interesting ones, is you've heard Quebec's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Horacio Arruda, say, it was weeks ago, really, that said, we think that, it's possible that kids may not develop symptoms as severely as others. And there's been a lot of discussion going back and forth around that. I've got a neighbor who's a teacher, and it's interesting because when I spoke to her about it, I said, what do you think about that? And she looked at me and said, that's fine that they may not have symptoms, but I'm in a different age group. And what if they are carrying it and give it to me? Then I'm in trouble. And this is a consideration that I think a lot of provinces are going to start to have to tackle right now, which is if we do send students back to school, how do we do it? Do we replicate like we've seen in Denmark, where they are going with half the number of students, making sure that in each classroom that they continue to be the 2 meters apart? is that even possible in some places? For instance, that neighbor of mine teaches in one of those portable classrooms, and she said if she cuts that classroom in half, it is still not enough room to have people physically distant apart enough. So this is something that a lot of school boards and provinces, frankly, are going to have to deal with. They understand that part of the key to getting things back going and getting the economy up and running is getting those workers back to work. And then the question is, where do the kids go?
Yeah, that is a question for so many of us parents. Okay, thanks so much for that, Mike. South of the border now, the United States has been hardest hit by the COVID-19 crisis. That country has the most cases in the world by far. There are now close to 900,000 known infections in the U.S. and more than 50,000 deaths. That's twice as many as Italy. Over 20,000 people have died in New York State alone, where there are almost 270,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19. Now, as the number of cases in the U.S. approaches 1 million, some states are rushing to open up their economies. Global's Jackson Prosco joins us now. Jackson, what do the plans look like for these states planning to reopen very soon?
Well, Farah, Georgia's the most prominent example, where as of today, barbershops, bowling alleys, tattoo parlors, hair salons, nail salons can all reopen, provided they maintain social distancing. It's not clear how you do that when you're getting a haircut, but nevertheless, some of those businesses are in fact allowed to open. And as of Monday, restaurants can open for dine-in service as well. Worth pointing out that none of the states that are doing this have actually met the official White House guidelines for reopening. They're doing it on their own, feeling that the time is right. But as you pointed out, those case numbers are staggering. The numbers continue to climb. And Farah, the real worry is this is going to lead to a surge in cases and infections.
Now, Jackson, there's interesting data coming at us from New York's first antibody study, which a lot of us are looking at.
Yeah, it suggests, a higher percentage of the population has actually been infected with this, which is bad news because it suggests that this is spreading far and wide and going undetected. Good news in the sense that it may be lowering the overall fatality rate, but there's so much that's still unknown. And one of the concerns here, Farah, is that those antibody tests are not deemed to be overly reliable at this point. They're either giving false positives or false negatives. These are early days, but this sample of 3,000 people kind of gives us a picture of the undetected spread that may be taking place in communities around the world right now.
And, we heard that from Theresa Tam. They need to make sure this test is reliable before we do any antibody testing. But that could be obviously a game changer. I want to talk to you quickly. Oh, you know what? We have the Prime Minister coming. I'll check in with you later. Thanks so much, Jackson. Here is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau with his Friday address.
Bonjour à tous. Hello, everyone. This has been a heartbreaking week for Nova Scotians and for all Canadians. At 2 p.m. Atlantic time, we will observe a minute of silence in honor of Constable Heidi Stevenson and all the victims of the Nova Scotia shooting. I also want to remind everyone that at 7 p.m. Atlantic or 6 p.m. Eastern, a virtual vigil will be held to remember those who were taken from us too soon and support their friends and family during this particularly difficult time. I hope that many of you will join us and wear red today in a show of solidarity. Let's come together to support these communities who suffered immeasurable loss. Let's celebrate the lives of those who left us too soon. Let us remember the families, friends, loved ones whose absence will linger for years and lives. You can find more information at novascotiaremembers.com. La semaine qui se termine a été particulièrement douloureuse pour les gens.
This week has been extremely painful for citizens of Nova Scotia and all Canadians. At 2 p.m. Atlantic time, we will observe a minute of silence to honor the memory of Constable Stevenson and all the victims of the shooting in Nova Scotia. A virtual vigil will be held at 7 p.m. Atlantic time or 6 p.m. Eastern time to celebrate those who have left us too soon. This will allow us to show friends and families of the victims that we are there for them, to show solidarity during these extremely difficult times. I hope that you will be numerous in joining us for this virtual visual and to wear red as a show of solidarity today. For more information, I would invite you to go to the website novascotiaremembers.com.
Our government has been working with its provincial and territorial partners not only to get through this crisis, but to position our economy to rebound once it's over. And a big part of this work means listening to the concerns of Canadians and making adjustments as we go along. One thing we've heard is that small businesses are having trouble making rent because of COVID-19. If you've had to close up shop because of public health recommendations, if you don't have a lot of money coming in because people aren't spending as much these days, you may be worried about losing your office space or not having a coffee shop to reopen after this crisis. So last week, we said that we're planning on introducing the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance. And today, I can announce that we've reached agreements with all provinces and territories to lower rent by 75% for small businesses that have been strongly affected by COVID-19 for April, May, and June. The government will cover 50% of that reduction, with the property owner covering the rest. If you are a small business that has been strongly affected by COVID-19 and you're paying less than $50,000 per month on rent, you'll be eligible to receive this support. It will also be there for nonprofits and charitable organizations that are struggling right now. We'll also have more to say in the coming days about rent support for larger businesses. La semaine dernière, j'avais annoncé notre intention d'instaurer.
Last week, I said that we would implement our Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. Today, I can confirm that we have reached agreements with all provinces and territories to lower rent by 75% for small and medium-sized businesses that have been affected by COVID-19, and this for April, May, and June. The government will cover 50% of this reduction, and the owners will cover the rest, 25%. This is support that will be available for small businesses that have been hard hit by COVID-19 and whose monthly rent is less than $50,000. Nonprofits and NGOs will also be eligible for this program, and soon we will have new announcements for larger businesses. Later today, I will have a discussion with the premiers of provinces and territories, and many things are on the program. We will continue our discussions with regards to the gradual reopening of the economy. Canada is a very huge country, and the pandemic did not hit every region in the same way. Canada is a federation, so we have to adapt our response to each province's reality. But reopening the economy, regardless of the province or the territory, has to be done in a phased-in way. We have to make sure that the progress that has been made won't be lost. There's a lot of coordination efforts that have to be done on a national scale. We're going to work with provincial governments, territorial governments, to implement principles and recommendations that will ensure the safety of citizens. Let me be clear with regards to the reopening of the economy. This won't happen overnight. We have to go ahead step by step. If you don't want us to start back at step one, everyone has to be vigilant and to follow the experts' recommendations. Since the beginning of this crisis, we are learning by what's happened in other countries such as Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and we can see the challenges linked to reopening up economies. That is why we have to be extremely careful. Each region could have a distinct approach. So if you see on the news that another province is going to ease up on regulations, you still have to follow the guidelines that apply to where you live. If not, there is a real risk of losing all the progress that we've made until now. As I said yesterday, we are witnessing very troubling scenes in long-term care homes throughout the country. This is unacceptable, and our government will be there to help. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces will be redeployed following official requests made by Quebec and Ontario. The Minister of Public Safety has accepted these requests. Work is underway in both of these provinces, and we are determining what are the needs to be filled and how we will do this. Quebecers and citizens of Ontario, all Canadians can count on us during this crisis. We're sending the Army to provide urgent assistance to help provinces to take control of the situation. But we know that this is not a long-term solution. We also are providing thousands of dollars to provinces to increase salaries of essential workers to ensure that our seniors will receive the care that they deserve.
What we're witnessing in long-term care facilities across the country is extremely troubling. It's unacceptable, and our government will be there to help the provinces. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces will be deployed after the Minister of Public Safety received and approved 2 formal requests from Ontario and Quebec. Reconnaissance work is underway in both provinces. We're identifying what needs to be done and mapping out next steps. As I've said many times before, we will be there for Quebecers, Ontarians, and all Canadians during this crisis. We're deploying the military to provide emergency support to help provinces regain control of the situation. But we all know that this is only a short-term solution. We're also offering billions of dollars to provinces to top up the pay of essential workers and make sure that elderly Canadians get the support they deserve. Later today, I'll be meeting with the First Ministers to continue our work on supporting Canadians during this time. We're also going to talk about reopening parts of the economy. Canada is a vast country, and some regions have been hit harder than others during this pandemic. We're a federation, so we have to adapt our response to the realities and challenges of each province and territory. But I want to be clear that getting back to normal will not happen overnight. It's going to take time. It won't be as simple or as easy as flipping a switch. It'll require a lot of coordination at the national level, and our government will be there to do that work. We will be working with the provinces and territories to establish principles and guidelines to start reopening the economy safely. Over the coming weeks, you'll hear more talk about reopening, but you need to know we're not out of the woods. It's absolutely critical that everyone continues to follow local public health instructions as we move forward. For now, these instructions are the same for all Canadians. No matter where you live, you should be staying home as much as you possibly can. You should be washing your hands regularly, and you should always keep a safe distance of 2 meters from others. That is the only way for us to make it through together. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions au téléphone aujourd'hui. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Questions?
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Michel Lamarche, TVA Nouvelle, à vous.
Michel Lamarche, TVA. Hello. I'd like to hear you speak to commercial rents. There are some business owners that said that they were closing their shop or their restaurant. Could you tell us when the money will arrive for them? Don't you think that you should have acted more quickly? We know that this is an extremely difficult crisis for small and medium-sized businesses, such as restaurants, small businesses that have had to close because of COVID-19. This is why we recognize that even with the wage subsidy, fixed costs for businesses represent a huge challenge. This is why we're going to cover the rent, 75% of the rent for April, May, and June, and we'll see afterwards. For small businesses that have been hard hit by COVID-19. We have already implemented access to credit, easier access to credit for small businesses. They will have access to up to $40,000 to help them cover these costs in the interim, and money to support them. This rent support will be retroactive to help them for April. Yes, a follow-up question. I'd like to hear you speak to the long-term care homes in Quebec and the CHSLDs Some people have the impression that yesterday you were trying to sermon the provinces, and the Premier of Quebec seems to say the solution is simple, and it has been known for years now. The federal government had to increase healthcare transfer payments. Do you consider that this analysis is correct? And shouldn't you increase these healthcare transfer payments? I think that all Canadians are asking themselves questions as to what has happened in long-term care homes for seniors. This is a reflection that we all have to have, and questions will be asked of all levels of government as to what should have been done, and more especially what should be done in the months and the years to come. We will be part of these conversations. The federal government has to be part of the solution, and we will have these discussions. For now, we're trying to go through the crisis as best we can to help provinces to take control of the situation. We will be there to help Canadians. We will be there to help our seniors who are now in difficulty.
Obviously, all Canadians are asking themselves questions about the situation that has allowed so many of our elders to be so incredibly vulnerable to COVID-19 and related issues. We need to do better, and we will be working with the provinces on ways to move forward. We will, of course, be there to have conversations about increasing supports to the provinces for healthcare. We've seen significant needs on healthcare across the country. We will have those conversations in the future. Right now, our focus is on making sure we're giving all the help we need during this crisis to the provinces and specifically to Canadians right across the country.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. À vous.
Catherine Lévesque, Canadian Press. Hello, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back on rent. What will be the responsibility borne by provinces and territories with regards to these payments? Where is the money going to come from? In what share? And how will this unroll? For small businesses that have to pay $50,000 in rent or less per month and that are very affected by COVID-19 closures, we will allow them to pay only 25% of their rent for April, May, and June. Of these 75% that they won't pay, the owner of the building will cover or absorb 25%. And the federal government and the provinces will pay for the remaining 50%. So the proportion is 75% covered by the federal government, 25% covered by the provinces. We will have further detail in the following hour. Follow-up question? And on these bonuses for essential workers, you're offering money to the provinces, but we know that this was on the agenda last week when you met with the premiers. Have you reached an agreement? And if not, why not? We've made a lot of progress over the past week with the provinces. Of course, different provinces have different needs. We have the situation in Quebec and Ontario. Quebec has already acted. BC has already acted to a certain extent, so we will be there to support them and perhaps increase what's being done. Other provinces who are not facing the same pandemic, the same level of crisis, are uncertain. They don't know what type of assistance they need. So we are working with them over the past few days to find a way forward that is appropriate for everyone. We are there to help and make sure that our essential workers will have the necessary support.
Have been working over the past week with provinces on topping up the pay for essential workers, particularly those in long-term care facilities. We recognize that they are doing particularly important, they're always particularly important jobs, but they're particularly difficult and complex circumstances right now. But all provinces are in slightly different situations. So a number of provinces want to move forward very quickly. Others had a few questions about how it would apply in their province where the pandemic is hitting less hard, where budgetary constraints are different and choices are different. We are getting very close to having an agreement with all the provinces, and we should be able to move forward soon.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Laura Osmond, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. I wanted to ask you about the cost-sharing agreement with the provinces for the rent subsidies. Are they sort of set in stone at this point? Are they still being negotiated? And if so, are different provinces making their own deal with the federal government, or will it be consistent across the board?
Those are questions better suited for the more technical briefing a little bit later, but I can tell you that we have worked out this agreement with the provinces, and the program as it is right now is how it is going to unfold.
On follow-up?
Thank you. Some businesses are saying they have no revenue. They can't cover that 25%. And now that they've shut their doors, they don't think they're going to be able to reopen them unless they get full support. Is there more help coming for them? What do you say to those businesses?
This is an extremely difficult situation for Canadians, for businesses right across the country. We recognize that COVID-19 is hitting some people harder than others, some areas harder than others. And unfortunately, this is something that we are grappling with. We are trying to help as many people as possible. The businesses that have no revenue and are unable to make even the 25% rent, well, they still have access to that $10,000 of forgivable loans with a total of $40,000 available from the banks. That $10,000 actually represents an average month's rent for a small business in this country, which means a quarter of that can actually last for 4 months. This is aid that we've given to small businesses, made available without them having to indebt themselves further, to try and ensure that we get through this with as many of the small businesses that are the motors of our economy, the principal employers across the country, get through this difficult time and come back strong afterwards.
Merci. Opérateur, dernière question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Adam Uris, New Brunswick Telegraph. Line open.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for taking my question. New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs says several of the province's employers are struggling to get employees to agree to return to work, suggesting it's a repercussion of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Are there concerns that Canadians may instead want to stay home and collect benefits and not return to work? And was this thought of when the plan rolled out?
We are facing one of the largest health crises, the largest economic crisis of our lifetime, and Canadians need help. They need help paying their rent, they need help buying groceries, they need help caring for their loved ones. They've lost their paychecks, they've seen themselves very, very anxious about their own health, about their parents' health, about their future. We needed to help Canadians, and we did exactly that. Helping Canadians right across the country get through this pandemic is not just about generosity, it's about making sure that we are able to do the things necessary in every home across the country to be able to keep this country safe and to make sure we have an economy that can rebuild quickly afterwards. This government will help Canadians who need help. Period. Okay.
We are going through an unprecedented time. This is extremely serious if we look at a public health crisis and also an economic crisis. Canadians throughout the country need help. They need help to pay their rent. They need help to pay for groceries, to take care of their children or their parents. We are in a situation where we need to help people so that they can make appropriate decisions, stay at home, and wait for the pandemic to end. That's who we are in Canada. We help each other. We're there for one another. This is the only way for us to go through the crisis and to have an economy that roars back afterwards. This is who we are. We have to be there for each other.
Premier Higgs also says he fears that equalization payments that some provinces have come to rely on will be less lucrative in the near future as so-called have provinces struggle more than ever. Can you assure the provinces that they will not see a decline in equalization in the coming years?
Yeah. Equalization has a formula that has long been set, and we will continue to look at ways to ensure that it's working for provinces right across the country. It's important that Canadians in every province receive the services to which they are entitled right across the country. That's what equalization is about, and we support that principle very strongly.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada.
Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada. When you look at what's happening in the CHSLDs in Quebec, do you regret that you were not more generous in healthcare transfer payments provided to the provinces that were asking for this 5% increase? Do you regret that you weren't more generous? I think that we have to come back to these residences that are not always within the healthcare network. We might have to have a discussion to see if these seniors' homes should, in fact, be part of the healthcare system and be managed under the Canadian Healthcare Act. There are many different suggestions on the table, many discussions that will be held in the months to come. Right now, my priority is to make sure that we're helping people who are suffering today and tomorrow, and that's exactly what we're going to do. This approach that you're suggesting, do you think it would create resistance from provinces? Do you think that they'll feel as if you're taking away their jurisdiction? Would it be would you have conditions attached? Well, these are really good questions, and these questions will be asked when we have discussions between provinces and the federal government. We are a federation, and we are able to adapt to reality and to the world in which we live. We are united in our desire to see citizens well cared for, and that is exactly what we're going to work together to do. There will be a lot of thoughtful discussion, a lot of reflection after this process. We're working together to make sure that we're going to take care of all Canadians.
Of GCBC. I want to go back to what you said about the federal government coordinating the reopening of provinces. You talked about guidelines. What sort of guidelines is your government giving the provinces, and would you ever go so far as to tell a province not to reopen something?
I think we all understand that the gains that we have made in controlling the spread of COVID-19 to this point have come because people have been very, very diligent across the country about staying home, about not working unless it's essential, about not going out unless it's essential, to both protect essential workers and specifically to prevent our health system from getting overloaded. That has been successful. We also have seen that because of that success, we can now talk about gradually or carefully reopening economic activity in certain sectors. But we have to be very, very careful. That's why what we're working on in collaboration with the provinces is a set of principles and elements that should be in place and should be followed as provinces make the decisions on how and what they will reopen, when, and if even. Things like ensuring proper levels of testing across the province and contact tracing, but other things like ensuring workplace safety. If people work in cubicles, if they work in a startup with beanbags, if they work on a shop floor, if they work in a food production facility, what are the measures that need to be put in place to keep them safe? These are principles saying you need to make sure that workplaces that reopen are safe in health norms, but what those actually are, what that will look like, will be up to the provinces and the local jurisdictions to determine. But we need to make sure that as we look at economic reopening, we are grounding ourselves in the principles that'll ensure that we don't allow for further spread or a new spike of COVID-19. And if there are cases that start to resurge, as likely will happen here and there, that we are able to manage, control, and reduce them rapidly.
We got a lot more details on the Nova Scotia shooting this morning and the timeline with the gunman. We do now know that there was a call made to 911, and the RCMP were informed that the gunman was wearing a uniform, RCMP uniform, as well as driving a car that looked like an RCMP car. And yet there was still no emergency alert. Do you see that as a failure on the part of the RCMP?
I think right now we need to be there for the people of Nova Scotia, for the families and communities that are grieving, and give them all the support we can. Part of that support needs to be answering their many, many questions. Questions about what happened during the incident, what happened to their loved ones, but also questions about the police response and what exactly happened and what could have happened differently or better. Those questions are things that we are going to need to answer, and we're going to work very hard to ensure that those questions are answered.
Ian Wood, CTV News. Prime Minister, the Nova Scotia emergency response teams in Halifax and the shootings took place in rural communities across the province. It took over 12 hours to apprehend the shooter, and the RCMP have highlighted that this was a very difficult situation to be in. Are you confident that the RCMP is adequately resourced in rural communities?
I think these are questions that people are going to be asking right now in Nova Scotia, but indeed all across the country. And they are questions that we don't have the answers to yet. We need to understand exactly what happened, understand how the response was, understand where the response could have been better with different resources or different protocols in place, and ensure that, as from any tragedy of this scale, we learn and we improve to make sure that it never happens again.
Many of the financial aid measures that have been announced so far, whether they be personal or for business, have only been committed at this point through June, but with no end of the restrictions being loosened. You yourself just said earlier that we're not out of the woods yet. Should people and businesses expect those aid measures to be extended, or will they be on their own come the summer?
As we've seen from countries around the world, there is a lot of reflection on how we reopen the economy, how it happens gradually, whether there is a scaling down of certain measures, whether certain measures need to be continued fully for many more months. These are reflections that we will, of course, engage in with businesses, with Canadians over the coming months as we look at careful reopening, as we continue to remain closed and vigilant in other areas. The situation is ongoing, and as we have been from the very beginning, we will adjust and adapt to what we see actually happening. We will be there to support Canadians in the right way, in both ensuring that we get through this health crisis and ensuring that we come back as strongly in terms of the economy as we possibly can. But the only way to be able to do that is to make sure that for now and for the coming weeks, we remain extremely vigilant and we keep up with the social distancing rules.
Brian Mullen, Global News. Prime Minister, following up on some of the previous questions, some businesses say the rent relief announcement is too little too late and they've already had to close. How concerned are you that the long-term impact of this shutdown could be permanent for some sectors of the economy?
We moved forward on access to credit for small businesses quite quickly. We tried to ensure that through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the wage subsidy, that there be responses to businesses and to workers as quickly as possible to allow them to continue to pay for their groceries and their rent at home and support their families. We know certain businesses are extremely hard hit, and that's why the access to credit and the support for the rent is going to be important. But we also see that this is the greatest economic impact and event of our lifetimes, and it is going to be extremely difficult. our focus is on recognizing that, first of all, our economy and our businesses were in excellent shape before. The services that were needed, the activities we had as a country were going very, very well. This is an event that put us into deep freeze, put us into hibernation, as it were, and everyone had to stop and hold while we let this wave of COVID pass through. And our ability to hold well depends on many things, but including government's ability to support people, to demonstrate that we will be there to make sure that as many as possible of our businesses will be able to bounce back afterwards. We are working to try and get help out to as many people as possible. Some sectors are more hard hit than others, but we know at the end of this, people will need to travel for work, for pleasure. People will need to go to restaurants. People will need to become tourists again in different places across the country and around the world. There are businesses that are hardest hit now who will be able to restart later. And that is our focus on trying to get through this moment of hibernation, which Canadians are doing quite well, as you would imagine.
And a follow-up question about violence against women in rural areas. This has long been an issue, looking back at the Renfrew County massacre in 2015, which left 3 women dead, and this recent mass shooting. What can the federal government do to ensure the safety of women in rural, remote areas who are at risk of violence?
We have made significant investments over the past years in shelters for victims of domestic violence, of shelters of women facing gender-based violence. We've moved forward with a gender-based violence strategy. We are looking at stronger gun control measures that will include things like red flag laws that will give people the capacity not just to remove guns, but to prevent people from acquiring new guns if there are issues around domestic violence. But we recognize that there is so much more to do. And that is why, as a government and as Canadians, we need to continually pledge ourselves to be allies and solutions in the fight against gender-based violence.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wearing a red tie today to remember the victims of the Nova Scotia shooting. You can see he's touching the tartan ribbon that is tied to those trees at the front step. Again, just a symbol to remember the victims in Nova Scotia. Also, a moment of silence, just to let you know, is going to be happening at 2 p.m. and a vigil that starts at 6 p.m. a local time in Atlantic Canada. That is 7 p.m. Eastern time today, as all of us put our thoughts and our energy toward the victims in Nova Scotia. Let's bring in our Mike LeCouture, because I want to talk about the main announcement that came out of this, and that is relief, as you mentioned, Mike, before we got into this, for small businesses, covering rent, or reducing rent, I should say, 75%, 50% covered by the owner, by the government, the rest by the owner. But, one question was brought up today, and I'm sure a lot of small business owners are wondering it too. Some can't even come up with that 25% because they have no revenue coming in.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty, and that's one of the questions. The Prime Minister said, well, look, there was that small business loan or that business loan that we had out there, and they can continue to benefit from. Interesting, though, moments before you just came to me, the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses sent out a press release reacting to this, and basically, if I can say, they're happy that it's retroactive to April, because that's when a lot of these businesses started to feel the pinch, weren't able to make that payment. However, concerns that it might be too complicated to administer and might be administered by landlords as well, and unclear what the path will be going forward. So the Prime Minister also was asked about some of these programs, and he said, look, some of the technical details you'll get in the ministerial press conference a little later, but they're hoping that this will be there for some of these businesses and will keep them afloat. Interesting how he called it that the economy basically had to be put into hibernation. I've heard a former deputy minister of finance say it's likening it to putting the economy in a coma, and the body or the economy is in a coma while you try and fix the ailment. And the difficulty is that nobody knows what the cure is, nobody knows what the ailment is, and nobody knows when we can either come out of that hibernation or out of that coma. So it's interesting that the Prime Minister is sort of applauding Canadians for dealing with the hibernation, as we deal with sometimes in difficult winters, and saying that, look, we will come out of this soon. Eventually, businesses will get back up and running. Tourists will be coming back. People will have to go to coffee shops, to restaurants, and that sort of a thing. Almost as if he's saying, look, everybody, please just hold the line. We know that it's difficult. And there was a question as to why not, are some of these going to have to be extended, some of these measures, because it's only until the summer, or do you see it as a possible reopening then? And he said, look, we, throughout all of this, have tried to go along as we can and understand where the issues are, and then fill in the gaps and adjust as we go. Also talked about, the reopening of the economy and make sure that we, follow examples like South Korea and Singapore, where they have seen, little waves come back, and making sure that we don't make the mistakes of others. And I think that's where the Prime Minister continues to try and position the country and say he feels, it seems anyways, that it's better to have this sort of closure or this hibernation period for a little bit longer to make sure that we get through this. And that was part of the conversation when he said, guidelines for different provinces to reopen, to make sure that it's coordinated, despite the fact that there may be some individual provinces that feel that they can emerge from this a little sooner. He wants to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that it doesn't turn into another Canadian re-spiking or re-pandemic of this if people open in different provinces open too soon.
Yeah, as we've seen, as you pointed out, in other countries like Singapore and Japan and South Korea. He's talking about federal coordination, but he's saying that it is really up to the individual province. But is there a world where if the federal government says, wait a minute, this is not, you're opening this too soon, you're starting the economy? Because remember, it is like, I know you're saying that this hibernation thing, but for people who have small businesses, it is week to week, month to month for many of these people, right? So with that pressure in place, if someone restarts their economy, if a province does the federal government have the power to jump in?
It doesn't seem like they do, because, because we are a federation, he said we need to make sure that we do this coordinated, but at the same time, acknowledging again that a province or a territory could be in a completely different position depending on their economy and individually. So that's why they continue to have these calls, to make sure when they speak to the leaders of the provinces and territories that everybody is moving forward in the same direction, even if it's slowly. Maybe one might be ahead of the other, but to make sure that they are going in some sort of coordinated way.
The other thing that really struck me was the tonal shift, a bit of a shift there when he was asked. It was specifically about New Brunswick, but it was about concerns that Canadians will want to stay home and take advantage of the CERB. Actually, Mike, I had the clip. We just got it. I want to play it for you.
We are facing one of the largest health crises, the largest economic crisis of our lifetime, and Canadians need help. They need help paying their rent. They need help buying groceries. They need help caring for their loved ones. They've lost their paychecks. They've seen themselves very, very anxious about their own health, about their parents' health, about their future. We needed to help Canadians, and we did exactly that. Helping Canadians right across the country get through this pandemic is not just about generosity, it's about making sure that we are able to do the things necessary in every home across the country to be able to keep this country safe and to make sure we have an economy that can rebuild quickly afterwards. This government will help Canadians who need help. Period.
So, Mike, a passionate Prime Minister there, and he said even in the French translation later that this is who we are as Canadians. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that the Prime Minister understood that at that period in time that everybody who needed something quickly. And I think what the Prime Minister is trying to say there is essentially, look, we understand, because that question specific to New Brunswick was, what do you say to people and to premiers who are saying that workers don't want to come back to work because either they're making more money on the CERB or they feel like it's a better deal for them? And the Prime Minister is just basically saying, look, we had to tailor this program to make sure that it was available to the Canadians that needed it, and we wanted to be as generous as we could to keep people going. Think about where we were a month ago, and I think that is something that potentially people are losing sight of. Is that at that time it was a countrywide shutdown, and now when things are starting to look at like they're going to reopen, reamp up, this is when the government now probably has to change a posture and look at it and say, look, this is what the program was then. If now it looks like provinces are starting to restart their economy, then they may have to possibly rein things in. But the Prime Minister said, look, people needed it, so we gave it, and this is who we are as a country.
Okay. Michael Couture from Ottawa, thank you so much. And just to recap for everyone at home, the Prime Minister spoke about provinces reopening, saying we're not out of the woods. Regardless of where you live, you should be staying home as much as possible. Also help coming for small business owners. The Prime Minister announced an agreement's being reached with the provinces for commercial rent relief. So rent is going to be lowered by 75% for small and medium-sized businesses in the months of April, May, and June. The federal government will cover 50%, while the property owner will cover the other 25%. More information on globalnews.ca and a reminder of the Global News stream for tonight's vigil at 6 p.m. Atlantic time.
Bonjour et merci de vous être rejoint à nous
Hello,
aujourd'hui.
and thank you for joining us here today.
Today, we will hear from Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, the Deputy Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Howard New, by video link, the Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau. Also by video link, the Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade, Mary Ng, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Navdeep Bains, and Minister of Public Services and Procurement, Anita Anand. We are going to end this press conference at 1 p.m. sharp, indeed a few moments before 1 p.m., in order to observe a minute of silence to honor and mourn the victims of the Nova Scotia shooting. Okay, Dr. Tam, please.
Hello, everyone, and bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello,
I'll
everyone.
start, as usual, with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 42,750 confirmed cases, including 2,179 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 643,000 people, with over 6.5% of these testing positive. As outbreaks in long-term care homes continue to define one of our biggest struggles and deepest heartaches with COVID-19, I want to highlight the work of those who have endured and those who have rushed in to help. I'd like to do this in a personal story shared with one of my staff. This is the story of Michelle, a nurse in Nova Scotia, who was recently reassigned to care for COVID-19 patients at a nursing home. To minimize any risk to her family, she has decided to live in a hotel for the duration of her work assignment. Sensing her unease, her 3 children wanted to give her a boost and let her know they understood. So in a poem, they, and with a little help from Dad, wrote, "My mom is a hero, so make no mistake. If the world ever needs her, she'll do whatever it takes. We know that she worries. Please don't, we're fine. We know the world needs a hero, so it can borrow mine." Healthcare workers across Canada are going the extra mile every day to care for our most vulnerable. We cannot let their sacrifice or the personal risk they are taking to be in vain. However, these weeks have been hard on everyone, whether at home or on our supply roads, in grocery stores, pharmacies, or on the front lines of healthcare. No one can measure one person's struggle against another. There is always more to the story. If you are struggling at home, with anxiety, fear, violence, problematic substance use, or other concerns, there's help. You can find a full range of supports through our new Wellness Together Canada portal that is dedicated to providing resources for mental wellness. You can access the portal through canada.ca/coronavirus website or the Canada COVID-19 app. I'll end by paraphrasing Michelle herself. To all of our essential service heroes out there, stay safe. To everyone else, please stay home and staying within your bubble. Give a hug to your loved ones. Hug it out for our heroes and for all those who are isolated while they cannot hug their own. Stay home. Save lives, Canada. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Tam, and that was a very touching story. Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you very much, especially Michelle's 3 children. You guys are right, your mother is a hero, and thank you for giving her up and lending her to other people for a while. Okay, maintenant je donne la parole à Dr. Howard New.
And now over to Dr. Howard New.
Merci. Bonjour.
Go ahead, Howard.
Tout d'abord, voici les derniers chiffres
First of
sur la
all, here are
COVID-19 au
the
Canada.
latest numbers
Nous
on
comptons
COVID-19
maintenant
in Canada.
42
There are now 42,750 confirmed cases, including 2,179 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 643,000 people,
parmi lesquels plus de 6,5%
with over
ont
6.5%
obtenu
of
un
these
résultat positif.
testing positive.
Comme les éclosions dans les établissements de soins
As
de longue
outbreaks
durée
in long-term
comptent
care
parmi nos
homes
plus
continue
grands
to define
luttes et
one
nos
of
plus
our
grands
biggest
chagrins
struggles
liés à la
and
COVID-19,
deepest
on
heartaches
tient à
with
souligner
COVID-19,
les efforts
I
de
want
ceux
to
qui
highlight the
travaillent en
work of
première
those who
ligne
have
et de
endured
ceux qui se sont
and those who have
empressés à leur
rushed
venir
in to
en
help.
aide. Pour ce faire, j'aimerais vous raconter une
To do
expérience
so, I'd like
personnelle
to
partagée par un
tell
des
you a
membres de
personal
notre
story shared
personnel.
with one of my staff.
C'est l'histoire de Michel,
This is the story of
infirmière
Michelle,
en Nouvelle-Écosse,
a nurse
qui a
in Nova
récemment
Scotia
été réaffectée
who was
dans
recently
une maison
reassigned
de soins
to care for
infirmiers pour soigner des
COVID-19
patients
patients
atteints
at a
de la
nursing home.
COVID-19. Pour éviter de mettre les membres de sa
To
famille
minimize
à
any risk
risque,
to her family,
elle a décidé de
she's
demeurer dans
decided
un
to
hôtel
live in a hotel
pendant son affectation
for the during of her
professionnelle.
work assignment.
Sentant son malaise,
Sensing
ses 3
her
enfants
unease,
ont voulu lui
her 3
remonter
children
le moral
wanted to
et
give her
lui
a
ont dit
boost
qu'ils
and
comprenaient
let her
la
know they
situation.
understood.
Ils ont donc écrit un
So,
poème avec un peu
in a
d'aide de leur
poem,
papa.
they wrote
Ma
with a
mère
little
est une
help from Dad.
héroïne, ni plus,
My
ni
mom is a
plus ni
hero,
moins.
so make
Si
no
on a
mistake.
besoin d'elle, rien ne
If the world
l'empêchera
ever
de
needs
faire
her,
du bien.
she'll do
Si on
whatever
sait
it
qu'elle
takes.
s'inquiète, mais maman,
We know that she
ici tout va
worries.
bien.
Please don't.
Le monde a besoin de
We're fine.
héros, on comprend,
We know the world
elle
needs a
s'en
hero,
vient.
so it can
Chaque
borrow
jour,
mine.
les travailleurs de la santé partout au Canada se dépassent pour prodiguer
Every
les
day,
soins aux plus
healthcare workers
vulnérables
across
d'entre
Canada are
nous.
going the extra
Nous ne
mile to
pouvons
care
pas
for our most
accepter que leur
vulnerable.
sacrifice
We cannot
ou
let
que
their
les risques qu'ils
sacrifice
prennent
or the personal
soient en
risks
vain.
they are taking be in vain.
Cependant, les dernières semaines
However,
nous ont tous mis à
these last
l'épreuve,
weeks have been
que ce
hard on
soit à la
everyone.
maison ou sur nos
Whether
lignes
at home
de
or on our supply
ravitaillement,
roads,
dans les épiceries,
in
les
grocery
pharmacies
stores,
ou dans les services de
pharmacies,
soins de santé de
or
première
on the front
ligne.
lines of healthcare.
Personne ne peut comparer les
No one
défis
can measure
des uns à
one
ceux
person's
des
struggle
autres.
against another.
Nous ne connaissons
There is
jamais
always more to the
toute
story.
l'histoire. Si vous éprouvez de la difficulté à la
If
maison,
you're struggling at home
êtes aux prises avec de l'anxiété,
with
de la
anxiety,
peur,
fear,
de la violence,
violence,
une consommation problématique de
problematic
substances
substance
ou
abuse,
toute
or
autre
other concerns,
préoccupation, de l'aide existe.
there is help.
Vous pouvez trouver
You can find a
toute
full
une gamme
range
de
of
services de
supports
soutien sur
through
notre
our
tout
new
nouveau portail Espace
Wellness
Mieux-être
Together
Canada,
Canada portal
voué à offrir des
that
ressources
is
pour la
dedicated
santé
to
mentale.
providing
Le
resources for
portail
mental wellness.
est accessible à
You can
partir du
access
site
the
web
portal through the
canada.ca
canada.ca
le coronavirus
/
ou de l'application
coronavirus
Canada
website
COVID-19.
or the Canada
Je termine
COVID-19
en
app.
paraphrasant Michel.
I'll end by
À tous
paraphrasing
nos
Michelle
héros des
herself.
services essentiels,
To all our essential service
protégez-vous.
heroes out there,
À tous
stay
les
safe.
autres, je vous en prie,
To everyone
restez
else,
à la maison.
please stay
Et
at
tout en restant dans votre
And
bulle,
staying within your
serrez
bubble,
vos êtres chers
give a
dans
hug
vos
to your
bras.
loved ones.
Serrez-les contre vous pour nos
Hug it
héros
out
et
for
pour
our
tous ceux
heroes
qui sont isolés,
and for
qui
all
ne peuvent
those who
serrer
are isolated,
les leurs.
while they cannot
Restez à la
hug their
maison,
own.
sauvez
Stay
des
home,
vies.
save
Canada.
lives, Canada.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. New. And now we'll
Thank you
hear
very
from
much,
our
Dr.
Minister
New.
of Finance, Bill Morneau. Bill, please.
Well, thanks, Christia, and good afternoon. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about small businesses, and I know my colleague Mary Ng will be talking about the same subject after me. We know that so many small businesses have been hit so hard during the course of this COVID-19 crisis. And so what we want to talk about today is a program that will help them with their rent payments. For the last week or so, we've been working together with provincial and territorial partners to bring significant relief to struggling small businesses. And I'm pleased to say that we now have agreements in principle with all of the territories and provinces to offer the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. Through the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, we'll offer qualifying commercial property owners forgivable loans that will cover 50% of impacted tenants' rent, in exchange for them providing a rent reduction of at least 75% and agreeing to a moratorium on evictions. And we know that this is working together. We all have to do our part in supporting those who are facing economic hardship. The Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program will be available for qualifying commercial property owners with tenants that pay less than $50,000 a month in rent and that have experienced at least a 70% decrease in their revenues. Eligible tenants will include small businesses, nonprofit, and charitable organizations. Eligible landlords who've already stepped up and offered 75% or more reductions for April or May, or who would like to retroactively do so, can apply. We expect that this new benefit will be available starting in mid-May. With the first month of it around the corner, we're asking that landlords try to be flexible as they work with their tenants in the coming days. Nous avons maintenant un accord de principe avec toutes les provinces et territoires pour offrir l'aide d'urgence aux loyers commerciaux du Canada afin d'aider les petites entreprises canadiennes touchées par la crise. Par l'entremise de la Société canadienne d'hypothèque et de logement, nous offrirons aux propriétaires d'immeubles commerciaux admissibles des prêts remboursables qui couvrent 50% du loyer des locataires touchés en échange d'une réduction de leur loyer de moins 75% et que ces propriétaires acceptent un moratoire sur les expulsions. L'aide d'urgence au Canada pour les loyers commerciaux sera offerte aux propriétaires d'immeubles commerciaux dont les locataires payent moins de $50,000 de loyer par mois et qui ont connu une baisse d'au moins 70% de leurs revenus. Les locataires admissibles comprennent les petites entreprises, les organismes à but non lucratif et du secteur de la bienfaisance. Les propriétaires qui ont déjà offert du soutien à leurs locataires, soit 75% ou plus de réduction pour avril ou mai, peuvent également présenter une demande. Nous prévoyons que le nouvel programme sera disponible à partir de la mi-mai. For significantly affected small businesses, this supports on top of the interest-free Canada Emergency Business Account loans with forgivable portions of up to 25%. It's on top of also the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy benefit. And of course, it's in addition to the deferral of income taxes, GST, HST payments, and customs duties. Finally, we're also providing significant credit support through the Business Development Bank and Export Development Bank of Canada, and for people, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit for those of you who are off from work or on furlough. Our response plan, Canada's COVID-19 Economic Response Plan, is among the most ambitious and generous among G7 countries because we believe that by taking action now, we will be more prepared to get out of this challenge when we get through it. So thank you very much. Thanks, Christia.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. Now we will hear from our Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade, Mary Ng. Mary, please.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you, Bill. Bonjour tout le monde. And to all of the Canadian small business owners, entrepreneurs, and sole proprietors and communities across the country, more help is on the way. You've just heard that from the Finance Minister. We know that in this difficult time, many of you are struggling to keep those lights on. And you're making incredible sacrifices to help Canadians stay safe by flattening the curve and, in many cases, temporarily closing your doors down. And while we've seen a severe downturn in businesses or you've had to close your doors to COVID-19, it doesn't mean that your commercial rents payments have had to stop. We've put help out there to help with your expenses by deferring customs duties and tax payments, creating a 75% wage subsidy, and a variety of lending supports. But we've certainly heard loud and clear from small business owners that you need help with your rent. And today is that relief. And as you've heard, we're partnering with the provinces and territories for businesses who are experiencing hardship as a result of their rent payments for April, May, and June. And under these rent agreements, we are going to be able to provide forgivable loans to incentivize commercial property owners to help their small business tenants with rent by at least 75% and to refrain from evictions. Il s'agit de soutenir les petites entreprises et les
This is about
entrepreneurs
supporting small businesses
sont le plus touchés par cette
and
crise et
entrepreneurs.
ont le plus besoin de notre help. It will mean
For
that
those who
family
need our help
restaurant in
most.
the neighborhood who's made the tough decision to close their doors can now be helped with their rent payment. It also means that local furniture store that usually relies on Main Street foot traffic can stay afloat to cover the costs of their warehouse space. Or that self-employed beauty salon owner who can't take on clients right now, that she's going to be able to keep up with her rent until it's safe to open her doors again. Our work is far from over, and we're going to keep listening, we're going to keep acting, and we'll keep supporting you every step of the way through this crisis. And I want to thank Canadian small business owners for your resilience during this period. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. Now we will hear from the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Navdeep Bains. Nav, please.
Thank you very much, Christia, and good afternoon, everyone. Je suis heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui pour faire une mise à jour
I'm happy to be here
sur la
today to update you
mobilisation
on
du
our
secteur
industrial
industriel pour
mobilization
lutter contre la
efforts
COVID-19.
in addressing.
Our approach has been the same from the start. Companies reach out to us online through our portal, nearly 6,000 since the start a month ago, and we look at these offers against the needs of Canadians. When there's a promising match, we sign a letter of intent. Then we work with the company to support retooling, and often this means bringing companies together in new partnerships and supply chains. Finally, we finish by signing a contract for purchase. So I'll start with some progress on letters of intent for medical gowns. We facilitated the transformation of construction house wrap from inter-tap polymer and airbag materials from Autoliv into fabrics that meet the strict requirements necessary to use in the manufacturing of medical-grade gowns. By connecting these two firms with Canadian apparel manufacturers from across the country, they can now sew medical gowns with this new made-in-Canada fabric, effectively bypassing fabric shortages with an entirely new supply chain. This has enabled us to move forward from letters of intent to contracts with Mustang Survival, George Corey, Rudel, and Yoga Jeans. These companies join the ranks of Stanfield, Calco Group, and Canada Goose as Canadian apparel companies stepping up to provide critical medical gowns. In total, contracts with these 7 companies have resulted in more than 18 million gowns, with deliveries starting this week. I'll share one more example of how these new partnerships in Canadian industry have helped us in the fight against COVID-19. Luminultra, a producer of testing reagents in New Brunswick, was in short supply of chemicals for production. Having reached out to us through that portal that I mentioned earlier, we connected Luminultra to chemical supplies in Canada so they could keep on producing reagents critical to testing. Now let me move on to retooling efforts on face shields and masks. Canadian manufacturers have stepped up in difficult times to retool in the fight against COVID-19. And many of them are from an automotive sector, a sector that I'm very familiar with. I started my career in that sector. And we're working on contracts with more than a dozen companies that will deliver millions of face shields, including the likes of Windsor Mold, Dynaplast, and Inksmith. And this allows us to meet current requests from provinces and territories with Canadian supplies. We've also signed a letter of intent with General Motors. and they're working to retool its Oshawa assembly plant to help with the mass production here in Canada, and we're assisting them in this process. Bravo à toutes les entreprises qui se sont réorganisées pour nous aider à améliorer notre chaîne d'approvisionnement.
To strengthen
and
our
together,
domestic supply
we're
chain.
rising to the challenge. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you, Nav. And now we'll hear from the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, Anita Anand. Anita, please.
Merci beaucoup, Christia, et bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
Before I begin, let me say that as someone born and raised in Nova Scotia, my heart goes out to everyone who lost loved ones and friends this past weekend. This tragedy comes as we work to contain COVID-19, making it ever so difficult to grieve together. From spending the first 18 years of my life in Nova Scotia, I know that Nova Scotians are a very closely knit group. In these tragic times, know that I and all of Canada stands with you. Pendant que nous continuons à lutter contre la propagation de la
COVID-19,
mon ministère continue de faire des achats proactifs et agressifs d'équipements de protection individuelle et les fournitures médicales qui nous aideront à traverser cette pandémie. Today, I will be addressing international procurements, domestic production, and I will provide an update on our procurements. Given the intense global demand for equipment and supplies, we are facing many challenges. Much of the world's supply is manufactured in China, and moving materials out of that country is highly complex. We have experienced challenges, as the Prime Minister discussed earlier this week. I want to reassure Canadians that we continue to adjust and refine our logistical and diplomatic approaches on the ground, not just in response to supply chain challenges, but in anticipation of these challenges. The aggressive approach that we are taking to expeditiously bring home supplies means that we are building in contingencies, overbuying in some cases, and implementing rigorous product testing. Progress is being made. We have received 6 plane loads carrying supplies from China since last Friday alone, and over 10 carriers have brought goods back to Canada overall from China. They have helped to carry millions more N95 respirators and surgical masks into Canada that are now in the Public Health Agency for testing. I want to thank Air Canada and Cargojet for continuing to step up and deliver. Last weekend, we also received an international shipment of an important base chemical needed for producing reagent, as my colleague Minister Baines mentioned, at Lumen Ultra in New Brunswick, which will allow for more COVID-19 testing. The company is now gearing up to deliver reagent for up to 500,000 tests on a weekly basis. Les produits importés sont soumis à des tests rigoureux tant à la source qu'au Canada,
both
où
at the
ils
source
sont vérifiés
and in
par
Canada,
l'Agence de la Santé
where they
publique
are
du Canada.
inspected by the
Les
Public Health
problèmes
Agency of
de
Canada.
qualité, bien
Quality
qu'ils ne
issues,
soient pas souhaitables,
while
n'ont rien
unwelcome,
d'étonnant compte tenu
are not
de l'augmentation de la
unexpected
demande
given the
mondiale
surge in
pour
global
ces
demand
produits.
for these goods.
Supplies are not only coming from abroad. Domestic production is ramping up and Canadian companies are delivering. I am pleased to announce with my colleague Minister Baines that this week we have signed contracts with 3 more Canadian companies, including Jacobs and Thompson out of Toronto, Windsor Mold Group out of Windsor, Ontario, to produce a total of 16 million medical face shields. The third company, Canadian Shield out of Kitchener, has moved from 3D printing to laser cutting technology to produce masks that can be easily sanitized for reuse. These are great examples of Canadian ingenuity and innovation. Je suis inspirée par la façon dont ces entreprises et bien d'autres ont relevé le défi et je suis fière de dire que d'autres entreprises canadiennes continuent de se joindre
to our Canadian lineup.
While the data may appear promising in some parts of the country, models suggest that there may be future outbreaks even after we get through this first peak. In terms of our procurements, this possibility means that we are still preparing for all eventualities. In light of this reality, I am pleased to announce that Stryker, a company headquartered in Waterdown and with production based in Quebec City, will provide us with 82 sterilization units that have been approved by Health Canada. These machines allow for the sterilization and reuse of equipment like N95 respirators, extending the life cycle of this important piece of equipment in healthcare facilities across the country. Je suis heureuse d'annoncer que Stryker, une entreprise dont le siège social est situé à Waterdown et dont la production se fait à Québec, nous fournira 82 unités de stérilisation qui ont été approuvées par Santé Canada. Ces appareils permettent la stérilisation et la réutilisation de l'équipement, comme les respirateurs N95. Ainsi, les établissements de soins de santé de tout le pays pourront utiliser cet équipement important plus longtemps. Nous avons également signé des contrats afin de répondre à un besoin éventuel pour au plus 10 unités de santé mobile. Ces unités qui sont conçues expressément pour prodiguer des soins respirateurs permettront aux autorités de santé locales de prendre en charge les afflux de patients au besoin. While we certainly hope this surge capacity will not be needed, we are taking every precaution to keep Canadians safe. The COVID-19 situation is very worrying and stressful, and Canadians want to know what we are doing to protect them. We are taking new steps to be as transparent as possible and to keep Canadians up to date on our work. Today, we are launching an online report detailing the progress that we are making on procuring key COVID-19 supplies. This running inventory will be updated weekly and gives information on key supplies that have been ordered and received. Of course, these numbers only tell part of the story, as our provinces, territories, and healthcare centers are also procuring supplies on their own. We are dealing with massive quantities of goods. Behind those numbers is an army of hard-working Canadians working here and overseas, doing all they can to deliver these goods. Je tiens à les remercier personnellement pour leur travail extraordinaire. I want to personally thank them for their extraordinary efforts. It is full steam ahead as we work to secure the supplies that healthcare workers need to keep themselves and Canadians safe today, tomorrow, and in the months to come. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for that, Anita. And Carl, we're ready to answer questions.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. As usual, we'll start with 3 questions on the phone, 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad if you have a question. De nouveau, veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. Our first question, notre première question, is from Louis-Samuel Perron from La Presse. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Louis-Samuel Perron.
Oui, bonjour. Une question pour le ministre Morneau par rapport au nouveau programme d'aide. Si je comprends bien, les propriétaires d'immeubles commerciaux ne seront pas obligés de s'inscrire au programme. Comment allez-vous les inciter à le faire alors qu'ils devront quand même payer 25% 50% du
will
loyer.
still have to pay 25% of the rent.
Merci. La chose importante pour nous, nous
The
savons que la
important thing
situation
for
est
us,
difficile
and
pour
we
les
know
petites
that
et
the
moyennes
situation is
entreprises.
difficult
Et de cette
for
façon,
small
nous
and
avons
medium-sized businesses.
un accord avec les provinces et territoires pour un niveau de support. Ça veut dire qu'ils vont avoir une réduction en loyer de 75%. Ça, c'est très important. Ils vont travailler avec leurs propriétaires et de cette façon, le propriétaire va avoir l'aide de la CMHC pour assurer qu'ils vont être payés 75%. Donc, on va avoir plus de détails sur le site web dans les prochaines heures et ça va aider les gens d'avoir un accord entre les deux parties.
Having to familiarize themselves with the agreement reached between the two parties.
Merci. Le Premier ministre a indiqué plutôt avoir bientôt de nouvelles informations pour un programme d'aide pour les entreprises plus grandes. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous en dire plus? Est-ce que c'est un programme d'aide pour le loyer aux entreprises plus grandes?
Rents for larger businesses too?
Merci. Nous savons qu'il y a aussi des défis pour les grandes entreprises. Nous avons déjà fait des choses. La subvention salariale est très importante pour les grandes entreprises, bien sûr. Mais aussi, nous savons que pour eux, comme pour les autres entreprises qui sont plus petites, le niveau de crédit est très important. C'est pour ça que nous sommes en train de considérer comment nous pouvons avoir une assurance qu'il y a assez de crédit pour eux. Et de cette façon, ils vont avoir un compte d'ici à les jours quand nous sommes heureusement, j'espère, avec une meilleure situation. Donc ça, c'est le but. Dans les prochains jours, on va avoir plus à communiquer.
We will have more information to give you.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you,
Prochaine
Minister.
question,
Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question is from Laura Osmond with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Thank you. Minister Freeland, you said it feels like a very, very long time ago that May would be a time when the federal government would be reopening discussions about health transfers with the provinces. Are those discussions still expected to happen next month, and how has this pandemic informed those discussions?
Thanks for the question, Laura. And as we've heard from the Prime Minister this afternoon, in just over an hour, the Prime Minister will have a First Ministers meeting that I will attend. I think that one of the chief subjects will be a discussion around principles and standards across the country for reopening the economy. I am certain we will also continue to discuss the healthcare response to the coronavirus and the costs of that response. So that is an ongoing discussion with the provinces. It includes, but is not limited to, the procurement work and the Made in Canada work we've heard about from Anita and Nav just now. It also includes some extraordinary efforts by the Canadian Armed Forces that we're seeing in Ontario and Quebec. The Prime Minister said something very important at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, which is that we were not going to quibble about federal and provincial responsibilities. We were not going to be limited in our response over questions over who would be paying the bill when it came to providing urgent health care to Canadians. And that is our approach right now to this urgent situation. In terms of the longer term, I think that we are still in a situation where our house is on fire and all of us need to be really, really focused on putting the fire out. But there for sure are some longer term lessons that I think we are all learning right now. Very central in my mind, and I know that of many, many Canadians, is that collectively we need to do a much better job of caring for our elders.
Laura, follow-up?
Thank you. And for Minister Morneau, we're hearing from some small business federations who are concerned that the program to subsidize rent for small businesses is voluntary on the part of the landlord. And so even if a small business feels they really need the help, their landlord may not want to play ball, so to speak. So what do you say to them?
Well, let me start by saying we need to understand that many of those small businesses are going through enormous challenges. The landlords also have been going through challenges because in many cases businesses have not been able to pay. So we think that this provides a very good incentive for both parties. For the small business, they're going to have a 75% reduction in their rent, so they'll be paying 25%. For the landlord, they're going to have a guarantee of 75% of their rent because 25% will be paid for by the small business and 50% in a forgivable loan by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So I think there's a very good incentive on both sides, and we're looking forward to this being a successful program, working together, of course, with the provinces and ensuring that people work together to get to the right outcome.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question is from Catherine Lévesque with la Presse canadienne. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Canadian Press.
Oui, bonjour à tous. Mes questions sont aussi au ministre Morneau et sentez-vous à l'aise de répondre en anglais si vous voulez. On est tous connectés en ce moment, on essaie de comprendre comment ce programme pour les loyers va fonctionner. Donc, je me demandais si vous pouviez nous expliquer peut-être étape par étape. Si je suis, par exemple, un propriétaire d'un édifice avec des petites entreprises, comment est-ce que ça va fonctionner concrètement et d'où l'argent va
to who I'm renting. How is it exactly is it going to
vous
work?
Demandé en anglais, c'est plus facile pour moi.
Well, as you offered, I will answer.
The tenant and the landlord will come to an agreement that the tenant will get a 75% reduction in their rent, and the landlord, by allowing that, will be able to get a loan from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. That loan will be forgiven. It's for 50% of the total rent. That will be forgiven when they show that they've given that reduction to the small business, to the tenant. So that's the way that it's intended to work. It's administered through the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, through our mortgage system. And we know that that will enable the landlord to have confidence that in their situation they'll get 75% of the rent paid, and the small business to know that they're going to get a 75% reduction. The federal government will be picking up the forgivable loan, so 50% of the cost, and then what will happen is from that loan, the provinces will be paying 25% of the overall cost. So that's the approach. That's how it will work, and we're looking forward to seeing a very positive situation for tenants and also for landlords who can now have more confidence that their tenants will be able to stay in the property and bridge the time through this COVID-19 crisis, so they'll be able to get back to business when we're through it.
Catherine, on suivi?
Merci beaucoup, c'est beaucoup plus clair, je pense, pour Trump qui est sur la ligne. Ma prochaine question est pour Madame Freeland. Je ne sais pas si vous avez des détails là-dessus. M. Trudeau a laissé entendre tout à l'heure que le ministre de la Sécurité publique allait envoyer des militaires là, au Québec et en Ontario. Je me demandais, est-ce qu'on peut avoir plus de détails sur combien de personnes seront envoyées? Est-ce qu'on parle de 1000 personnes par province? Quand peut-on s'attendre?
And when can we expect to see them in these long-term care residences in these provinces? Answer. I'm sorry, Catherine, but I cannot share specific numbers at this time. I discussed that issue this morning with Minister Harjat and Sajjan. Minister Sajjan and Minister Blair are very committed and are working in close collaboration with Quebec in order to organize the correct teams, the right numbers, the right places to send the Canadian Armed Forces members.
que Québec a et que
we understand Quebec's needs and Ontario's needs.
C'est nécessaire d'avoir une bonne organisation. On doit comprendre que on a besoin de personnel avec une formation médicale. Alors, ça prendra un peu de temps, pas beaucoup de temps. On comprend aussi que chaque heure est une heure très importante pour la vie des gens, mais ça prendra un peu de temps pour préciser exactement qui sera envoyé et où les gens seront envoyés. Mais je veux assurer les gens du Québec et de l'Ontario qu'on comprend absolument que c'est une situation très, très grave et le Canada sera là pour aider les Québécois et les Québécoises et les Ontariens et Ontariennes.
Merci, Madame la Première Ministre. We'll turn to the room. Julie.
Thank you, Minister.
Hi, Julie Van Dusen. The question for CBC, the question is for Mr. Morneau. I think everyone understands the need to help Canadians in this crisis, but I'm wondering if there is a limit to how much you can or will spend. At some point, you just hit a wall. For example, if we're in the pandemic this time next year, can you continue to spend at this rate?
Well, thanks, Julie. I think the way to think about the challenge we're facing is that we need to have an economy when we get through this crisis. So we are supporting individuals, we're supporting businesses to get through this time so that we'll actually have the ability to get people back to work rapidly, that they'll still be connected with their employer, that those businesses will still be able to function, will be able to get back up and running. So we think that the significant investments that the Canadian government has made in supporting people, in supporting businesses, will prepare us better at the outcome to have a stronger economy. We think it would be imprudent of us to not support people now and leave ourselves with a bigger challenge after. So that is our frame of reference in everything that we're doing. Of course, we're trying to make sure that the measures we take are creating the right incentives, that are creating the right length of time for the bridge that we need. And that's what we need to do with every program to make sure that they're cost effective and the right value. But make no mistake, we think the most important thing is to ensure that we have an economy coming out of this, that we have great jobs, that we have strong businesses, that we have not-for-profits that can continue to help people in the service that they've been providing for years. And the only way we can do that is providing measures like the one today that allows small businesses to get through this time while not having to pay for their entire rent if they have no revenues. That we see as critical to have an economy that will function afterwards.
So if Canada's credit rating goes down, what will that mean for how much it'll cost to service all the debt that we're piling up and to the value of the loonie?
Again, I think the way to think about this is the most important thing to our ability to be fiscally satisfactory and successful is that we have a strong economy coming out of this. So that is actually what's going to be the foundation that will allow us to pay down debts, that will allow us to continue supporting Canadians, and that will allow us to compare favorably against other countries in the world. So that is the frame that we've taken. You've seen, I think, that Canada is really a leader among other countries in supporting individuals and supporting businesses, and we think that's the right thing to do to get us through this.
Ian Wood, CTV News. Minister Morneau, I just want to pick up on that. This new plan, like many of the other personal and business emergency plans put in place, is set to go through June. What's the plan after that? Because we're told we're not out of the woods yet. So are these going to be extended into the summer, or are people on their own come July 1st or whenever these programs end?
I think what you've seen in all of the measures that we've taken is that we've taken measures that we think are appropriate for the information we have right now. So this measure is for the months of rent for April, May, and June. We believe we have information to make decisions based on what we think is happening in April, May, and June. We took a similar approach in providing the emergency response benefit, which goes for 16 weeks, and the wage subsidy, which goes for 12 weeks. So as we have information, we're taking decisions. We think it's appropriate that we take those decisions and reconsider them as we have more information. So as of now, we believe that this is the appropriate duration for this program. We believe it provides very strong support for small businesses, a 75% reduction in their rent, and strong support for landlords who now have a sense of 75% of the rent will be paid, giving them the ability to pay their mortgages to keep those properties functional. So we'll continue to consider the information that comes in and, of course, work with all of our partners to make sure that we're providing that right bridge to get through this.
My second question for Minister Freeland and Dr. Tam. Are you concerned about the patchwork approach to loosening restrictions? Saskatchewan said they're going to open up things like golf courses and parks, and municipalities have said other things too. The federal government has its approach. Are you concerned about this patchwork approach to loosening restrictions? And are we going to see some new modeling data that was expected this week?
So let me start, and then I'll ask Dr. Tam to offer her thoughts too. As we've said, there will be a conversation between the Prime Minister and the First Ministers that I'll participate in too this afternoon. And one of the chief subjects to be discussed will be approach to restarting the Canadian economy. Our view is that as a country, we should have some shared principles and some shared standards that help guide us all in knowing when and how to approach the restart of the economy. At the same time, we also absolutely understand that we are a huge and diverse country, and a huge and diverse country which has had and continues to have very different experiences of this global pandemic. And so that means that inevitably and quite rightly, we will be seeing a different timing, a different pace of the restart across the country, simply because the experience of the pandemic has been and continues to be different across the country. We hope, and I have a lot of confidence that in moving into this next stage, and I don't think we're there yet, in moving into this next stage, we will continue to have a really collaborative approach between the federal government and the provinces and territories and among the provinces and territories, and that all of us will continue to be guided by the thing that matters most to everyone, which is the health and safety of Canadians. Dr. Tam?
Yeah, so on the public health side, we collaborate on an ongoing basis with all chief medical officers of health. And what we are trying to do is establish the fundamental principles and criteria for each of the provinces and territories to calibrate the sort of path to the new normal. I think everyone agrees that we have to be extremely cautious because we cannot afford to have another upswing in a bigger wave. So that's the concern. So the type of approach that we think every jurisdiction would follow is absolutely make sure transmission has come down all the way to the bottom of that curve, and some of the criteria that goes with it, that their health system capacities are in place and have the ability to surge should we see another cluster or an outbreak, that their outbreak risks are minimized in special settings like those of long-term care facilities and other maybe congregate housing areas like persons experiencing homelessness, for example, and that they have advised their workplaces in terms of the preventive measures that they can take so that they can reopen safely. As well, I think all of us recognize that the importation risk is one thing that we will try and prevent. and it's not until the domestic transmissions have all been under control that we can even begin to look at some of those. So shoring up the importation approaches, and also keep ensuring that our public is engaged. So those are the kind of areas that we are working through and agree on, essentially. But so then that allows, I think, each of the jurisdiction to assess their particular situation, and with all of us moving sort of cautiously through that path. So absolutely, I think in Canada is such a big country, you cannot sort of hold up certain areas of resuming certain activities, while at the same time, of course, another jurisdiction that is still trying to get certain outbreaks in control must continue to do that as well. But coordination and sharing information is actually very important so that people are aware of what's going on across Canada. Yes, we are ready to do that. It's just the timing for when we can sort of cue it in, as it were. Thank you.
Hello, Minister Freeland. A recent survey showed that half of rural Alberta doctors in 44 locations were planning on withdrawing their services from hospitals because of contract disputes with the Alberta government. Does this cause any concern to the federal government during a pandemic?
You know, I was very personally moved by the poem that Dr. Tam read to us this earlier today. I think probably a lot of people were. Medical professionals across Canada are truly heroes right now, and we need all of them. And I personally have tremendous faith and confidence that the medical professionals across the country are today honoring their most important obligation, which is to save Canadian lives across the country. I know that that is what they're doing. I am grateful to them. Of course, there are specific political issues across the country, but I think right now everyone's priority needs to be, and I think in reality it is, taking care of and protecting Canadians. And I can say, you know, my dad is getting ready to go out in the fields in rural Alberta. He's 75 years old. I'm a little bit worried about him, and I said, Dad, how do you feel? He said he feels personally great, and he has 100% confidence in the medical professionals in Northern Alberta.
Thank you. Do we have time for another one? Or
Maybe one last. It's 12:56, so.
Okay, well, do you have any advice on how to resolve this situation from the federal level?
I think it's important for all of us today to bear two things in mind. The first is our house is on fire, and all of us need to focus first and foremost on that. And I really believe the overwhelming majority of Canadians are doing that. And then secondly, I just have tremendous respect for all of Canada's healthcare professionals, and I think all of us should be guided by that too.
All right. It's now 12:57, so we're just going to take a moment to remember the victims of the Nova Scotia shooting. If everybody could please stand.